After Shaka Zulu was gone, and strangers finally crossed into Zululand, a missionary warned the new king of hell. Mpande laughed. On this land, we eat fire. Before the spear entered his body, Shaka Zulu is said to have looked at the men killing him and warned them that they were not really taking power. They believed they were removing a dangerous king, a brother, a rival, a man whose rule had grown too severe to survive. But according to the tradition, Shaka saw beyond the blood in front of him. He saw something approaching from the edge of the world they knew. He called them the Swallows, the pale strangers who built their mud-walled shelters, the way swallows build nests, and who, like the birds that crossed from Europe to Africa, would one day spread across the land. Whether Shaka truly spoke those words in his final moments, or whether history placed them there afterward, the image is difficult to forget. A wounded king, betrayed by his own blood, staring past the assassins into a future none of them could fully understand. To some, he was a military genius who transformed a small chiefdom into one of the most formidable kingdoms in southern Africa. To others, he was a tyrant whose discipline curdled into cruelty and whose dream of unity left fear and devastation in its path. Both portraits perhaps are true, but neither is complete. Shaka Zulu did not randomly emerge as the figure history remembers. He was carved by years of humiliation, exile, and pressure, a world that taught him early that survival did not reward softness. Before the armies, before the royal settlements, before the shield walls and the famous horns of the bull formation, there was a child marked by shame. He was born around 1787, the son of Senzanga Kona, a Zulu chief, and Nandi of the Langeni people. Their union carried its own quiet scandal. Pregnancy before marriage, families who denied responsibility, and elders who insisted her swelling was caused not by a child, but by an intestinal beetle called Ishaka. Shaka's childhood was shaped by the fact that the world had already decided what he was, long before he had the power to decide anything for himself. A name that began as an excuse became the name history would remember. They moved through communities where protection was uncertain, and every day carried the risk of being cast out again. Oral traditions describe a childhood of mockery, rejection, and exile. The exact details are difficult to separate from later storytelling, but the psychological truth of the tradition has endured for a reason. A rejected child does not always break in the way people expect. Sometimes he watches. Sometimes he learns the hidden laws of power more carefully than the children who are protected by it. He begins to understand which gestures signal weakness, which voices carry authority, which humiliations people remember, and which fears can be turned into obedience. By the time Shaka entered military life under Dingiswayo of the Mthethwa, something inside him had already been sharpened. The regiment gave him what childhood had denied him: structure and recognition, a world where a man could be measured by endurance instead of birthrights alone. This new world had no patience for the weak. It was hard, ordered, and dangerous. Yet for Shaka, it may have been the first environment where his pain could be converted into usefulness. The qualities exile had forced into him now became weapons. He rose quickly. Strength helped, but strength by itself does not explain him. What set Shaka apart was the way he studied battle as if it were a living mind. He seemed interested not only in who won, but in why men hesitated, why formations collapsed, why distance gave warriors courage, and how fear moved through a group before the first body fell. To Shaka, warfare was not merely the clash of weapons, it was the management of human terror. The older style of combat in the region often involved throwing spears from a distance. Such warfare allowed bravery, but it also allowed separation. A man could strike from afar and still keep himself separate from the horror he had created. Shaka imagined something more direct. The weapon most associated with him was the exile, a short stabbing spear used in close combat. Popular legend often says he invented it, though historians are more cautious. What matters most is that he helped make this weapon central to the military system connected to his name. A thrown spear leaves the hand. A stabbing spear stays with the warrior. That difference changes everything. It requires closeness. It demands commitment. It makes war a test of nerve and presence, fought so near that every breath and hesitation matters. The large cowhide shield became more than protection. In the hands of a disciplined warrior, it could destabilize an opponent and make the stabbing spear terrifyingly effective. Even the name exile is said to echo the sound of the blade being withdrawn from flesh. Whether literal or more so symbolic, the detail captures the nature of Shaka's military world, removing the comfort of distance from war. When Shaka became ruler of the Zulu chiefdom around 1816, he did not inherit an empire. He inherited a relatively small political community in a region already full of tension and shifting alliances. Powerful groups like the Mthethwa and Ndwandwe shaped the political landscape. Warfare was already evolving as age regiment systems drilled young men into disciplined cohorts. Myth loves to pretend that Shaka appeared out of nowhere, a single man inventing a new world by sheer force of will. But the truth is more compelling. He didn't create the system. He drove it into extremes no one had imagined, a force powerful enough to reshape the region. Young men were organized into amabutho, age-based regiments connected to royal settlements. Their identities were shaped around service. Marriage could be delayed until warriors had earned the right to settle. Commanders rose through their usefulness, loyalty, and courage rather than birth alone. Local chiefs who submitted could remain, but their authority now lived beneath a greater shadow. In this system, Shaka did not merely command warriors, he reshaped the social order. A young man was no longer defined only by the narrow world of his childhood. He could become part of a larger identity, one disciplined through training, though surrounded by fear. That was one of Shaka's deepest innovations. He understood that conquest is not only about defeating bodies on the field, it is about reshaping where people believe they belong. Then came the formation that would become inseparable from his name, the horns of the bull. From above, the image is almost elegant. The center, known as the chest, advances to engage the enemy directly. While the opposing force focuses on the pressure in front of it, the horns sweep outward and around the sides, enclosing the battlefield like a living trap. Behind them wait the reserve, held back until the decisive moment. Its design carried a precision that could decide battles in moments. Every part has a role. Every movement serves a larger purpose. Individual fear is swallowed into collective motion. And by the time the enemy understands the pattern, the chest has fixed them in place. The horns are closing, and the reserve waits behind the line like a final answer. This is where Shaka's genius becomes inseparable from the darkness of his legacy. While his military system created unity, speed, and astonishing force, his rule created a society increasingly organized around obedience, and the pressures that come with war. Shaka's campaigns changed the region. Many communities were conquered, causing them to either get incorporated or scattered until eventually being forced into new movements. Historians later connected his expansion to the upheavals known as the Mfecane or Difakani, a period of displacement due to warfare which ultimately led to the transformation across southern Africa. Older accounts sometimes placed nearly all of that chaos at Shaka's feet, turning him into a single, monstrous explanation for a complex age. Modern historians tend to be more careful. Regional upheaval had multiple causes, and colonial writers often had motives for exaggerating African violence while minimizing the pressures created by trade, settlement, and imperial expansion. With that being said, an honest account does not require pretending Shaka was harmless. His wars mattered. His kingdom altered the balance of power. His military reforms sent shockwaves through surrounding communities. The smoke rising from broken settlements, the movement of families across harsh landscapes, the cattle driven away, the young men absorbed into new structures of command. These were not abstractions. They were the human cost of a state being forged by force. Every empire has its architecture, some built with stone, some with law, some with roads, ships, coins, or written decrees. Shaka's kingdom was built with bodies in motion, and at the center of that motion stood a ruler whose authority grew more absolute as his world grew larger. Although the most tragic turn came not from an enemy army, but from grief. In 1827, Shaka's mother, Nandi, died. To understand the significance of that loss, we have to remember what Nandi represented. She was not simply his mother in the ordinary sense. She was the person who had carried shame beside him, wandered with him, endured rejection with him, and formed the emotional root of his life before power gave him a new identity. When she died, something in Shaka appears to have broken. The mourning that followed became infamous. Surrounding communities were forced into displays of mourning. Stories say that over 7,000 people were executed, targeting anyone judged to be showing insufficient sorrow. Shaka ordered nursing cows to be slaughtered so their calves would know the pain of losing a mother. No crops could be planted. No milk could be consumed. No marriages or pregnancies were allowed. Any violators were executed. These measures contributed to famine and widespread suffering. A king loses his mother, and the kingdom is ordered to feel his wound. Private grief becomes public law. Personal pain becomes political atmosphere. A ruler who once had no power over the shame placed on him now possesses enough power to make an entire people participate in his sorrow. And when a ruler cannot separate his inner world from the world he governs, the people begin to live inside the ruler's trauma. By then, Shaka had created many enemies. Outside the kingdom, rival powers feared Zulu expansion. Inside it, men who had once benefited from his strength began to fear what that strength had become. His severity had helped build the kingdom, but the same severity now threatened to tear apart the circle closest to him. As fate would have it, in September 1828, near Dukuza, Shaka was attacked. His half-brothers Dingani and Malangana conspired with his bodyguard Mbofa, striking at a moment when many warriors were away and when Shaka's harsh mourning decrees, executions and growing instability had convinced them that the kingdom and their own futures were in danger. A master of open field maneuver and battlefield movement, assassinated in the one place where movement was impossible, a cramped passage inside his own kraal. Shaka built a world where every threat came from distance. His entire military genius was built around movement and the control of space. But assassination lives in the opposite world, that of which Shaka had no preparedness for. And then, the infamous prophecy. As tradition tells it, Shaka warned his killers that they would not truly rule, that power would pass to the swallows, the small shadows already gathering on the horizon. Whether the dying king truly said this or not, the tradition endures because it understands the deeper historical irony. Shaka had spent his life mastering one kind of power, but another kind was approaching. This new power did not always begin with a spear line. It arrived through traders, missionaries, guns, treaties, settlements, and governments that turned land into paper before turning paper into possession. After Shaka, Dingain took power. The Zulu Kingdom survived its founder and remained one of the great forces in southern African history. Decades later, under Cetshwayo, it would confront the British Empire directly and carve its name into world memory at Isandlwana, a victory so complete it stunned an empire. But the swallows kept coming, and where they lost with rifles, they returned with reinforcements. Where they lost on the battlefield, they advanced with borders, annexations, and the slow machinery of an empire. By 1887, less than 60 years after Shaka's death, Zululand was formally absorbed into British rule, not conquered by a single decisive battle, but by the steady pressure of a power that fought with paper as effectively as with guns. And still, history returns to Shaka, the child once cast aside who built a nation, the reformer who bent warfare to his will, the tyrant whose shadow stretched across the land, the strategist who understood fear itself, and the wounded son whose grief turned perilous when amplified by the power of a state. His life warns us against simple stories because power rarely arrives wearing only one face. It can organize chaos while creating new forms of suffering, giving people identity while demanding obedience in return, protecting a community from one danger by turning that community into a danger of its own. Shaka didn't just build an army. Fear was shaped into structure, humiliation into authority, and scattered loyalties into a kingdom that endured long after he was gone. But transformation requires sacrifice, and in Shaka's case, the payment was immense. His story leaves us with questions that history cannot answer comfortably. How much suffering can be excused by state building? At what point does survival become conquest? Shaka Zulu is not remembered just for conquering. Countless rulers left battlefields behind them. He endures because his life exposes the inner mechanics of power. It begins in the shadows of a man, in wounds no one else sees, in humiliations that refuse to fade, in the quiet resolve to never be powerless again. And it grows as people gather around that resolve, shaping it, feeding it, fearing it. And once that army becomes a kingdom that eventually settles as a system, it stops belonging to the person who sparked it. It becomes something larger, something that can protect and destroy in the same motion. That's why Shaka endures. His story shows how power is never just about conquest. It's about what happens when a single life, with all its pain and brilliance, becomes the engine of a nation, and how that engine keeps running long after the man himself is gone. Shaka's kingdom rose from the grasslands like a storm, but the storm did not end with his death. It moved into legend, into disputes over whether he was a monster or a genius, a founder or a warning. Perhaps he was all of them, or perhaps he was what any of us might become when pain meets opportunity. A life molded by forces around him, until the boy he once was could no longer survive inside the man that he became.